So you have been called to this moment by divine appointment. Today is our white stone service. It's our white stone ceremony. It's done in many Unity and New Thought centers. And it is a tradition that comes from a whole multitude of other traditions. So if you have not yet found a stone in your garden, in your house, anywhere, then go ahead and just grab a piece of paper this morning, because you're going to write down a word or a few words that come to mind. And those words are going to be guiding lights for you for this year. So oftentimes in the new year, we do what? We tend to, at the end of the year, reflect and think about what we did well or what wasn't going well or what we want to have emerge in the new year. And at the beginning of the year, we tend to set goals, make resolutions, make commitments, make plans. The white stone ceremony is a little bit different from that. See, all of these plans and goals and intentions that we set are great, and they're very human. And it's good and it works for a lot of us, right? But oftentimes there are things that happen in life that we don't expect. They're not part of what we committed to, or not part of what we intended, and they're not part of the goals that we set, or we feel like we haven't reached the goals. The white stone ceremony is less about putting something out there, less about us declaring something's going to happen and trying to strong arm ourselves into a better me or a better version of me or a better life. And it's about receiving. It's about creating a space, creating a container in consciousness that is open and expansive enough that when held spiritually, it actually makes the way for the goals, the visions, the resolutions, the commitments to emerge, to be fulfilled, to be potentially more successful. Because it's something that we receive. It's a humble asking for the higher possibilities to be communicated to us in a way that is unique and unrepeatable, in a way that is specifically for us. And what happens in that process is that we loosen our grip on these firm, rigid ideas that we have as goals. We loosen our grip on them and we lift them up, because we trust that this sacred process, this spiritual process of receiving a word, is something that we can show up for with mindfulness, attention, and intention. But with it, we trust. We trust that we have done the work, period. And then we are unfolding the journey. We're walking the journey. We're walking the path. But in that moment that we have this spiritual process that we experience today in meditation, we trust that we've ideated the blueprint. We have asked the question. We have invited in on a deep level the receptivity of all the spiritual substance, of everything needed and necessary to fulfill those goals and visions. So we don't go into this new year with goals and visions, but without the spiritual substance to fulfill them, without the spiritual strength to stand in our power, without the consciousness and the qualities of spiritual character that might be needed and necessary to express not only those resolutions and those goals and visions, but more than we could even imagine. And that's the process of the white stone service and the white stone ceremony. If we live without intention, We can just participate in what the next experience is. We can create from the lowest common denominator. I was driving on the road the other day and just recognizing how many people were out there. And again, there was some interesting experience with someone. And I just thought, if we lose our humanity, what do we have left? If we lose our kindness, you can have all sorts of experiences and all sorts of things. You can create all sorts of environments for yourself and for each other. But if when we hop from our lives into the collective, we keep getting tossed around by experiences in the human condition that are lower level experiences that are not characterized by compassion, loving kindness, forgiveness, spaciousness, then we are creating a messy world for each other. And that happens sometimes when we don't have a vision or a commitment, when we're not called to be something. What if right now, what if we created for ourselves, and what if we started a movement of compassion on the road, of spaciousness on the road? Like, what if we all worked on that? What if we addressed the open road with forgiveness and light, recognizing that it matters how we show up and that it's contagious how we show up, and that we are called to something higher, that actually being out there is a practice. It's a spiritual practice. How might that impact the world? You know, I became a vegetarian around the age of 19. And I remember all of the different comments that people would share about whether or not that would ever have an impact and ever make a difference. And at the time, there wasn't vegetarian food at most restaurants, unless you were at a restaurant that naturally had it. I mean, there was vegetarian food everywhere because everywhere has salads, right? But it wasn't a thing, right? And now we live in a time and a space that not only is there vegetarian food everywhere, there's often vegan food, there's often farm to table food, there's often gluten-free food. There's so many options. And there has been an impact. The same goes with when we show up for how we are called to be. And we stand in our intentions. And we also bring in the spiritual substance needed to hold fast to these commitments, to recognize that we're creating not just a life for ourselves, but we're creating a life for others on this planet. And that's a calling. That's a calling. It's not something to go into without intention. So when we think about walking out our front doors, can we get in touch with what we're called to be? And when we think about going inward and opening the door to our hearts, can we tune into what we're called to be? That's the divine appointment today. That's what we're here to be doing. We're here to be getting a word that's going to serve as your guiding light for the year, a word that is the essence of what Spirit is speaking to you today, through you today, what your highest self is calling you to be and calling you into, what you're going to be living into this year. It may be, for some of you, it may be a physical name, it may be an identity, it may be a concept, it may be a word that you just don't even understand, and different from resolutions, goals, and visions that we hold fast to. This reception of a word will certainly be characterized by adventure and inquiry, because we're not pulling it out of our thinking minds and saying, I want this year to be about this, right? We're not declaring the year is about something. We're not declaring it. We're receiving it. And with that comes a curiosity. With that, there comes a leaning in and a deep listening. That's not just about today or this week or the month of January, and then it drops off. That's why we call it a name that goes on the stone. It doesn't necessarily have to be a name, but we call it a name because it's like an identity for the year. There are so many experiences that people have from the White Stone service. Things that they didn't know were going to happen, that the word then later on in the year just makes so much sense. And they recognize how they were supported before they even knew what was going to be coming in this next year. They uncover and discover things about the word that support them, that help their spiritual development and unfoldment. So this isn't a resolution, it's not a goal. It's a time of receiving. And when we practice what we receive, when we show up with inquiry and curiosity to that word, and recognize that in this process, we're calling forth all of the spiritual substance to fulfill all of the human ideas, all the human goals and visions. It becomes more meaningful. It becomes even more important to engage in this process. When I was on the road the same day as the crunchy, interesting experience, I was heading to a friend's house to go visit. And I recognized on the side of the road in a yard in a neighborhood was a handmade sign, and it said, "You've got this." And those two experiences, one right after the other, were sacred and significant. One was individuals stepping forward in intention, in consciousness, and in service. And the other one was what happens when we're ordinary. It's what happens when we don't set the space, when we don't prepare ourselves, when we think things don't matter. But they matter. With that second sign, I was reminded that we don't need to worry about humanity when people are expressing their divinity. And in my heart, I thanked those people for that sign. And I thanked them for having it on my path that morning. We can have a powerful impact in our lives and in our world when we show up knowing that we are called to be in each moment with awareness and mindfulness, and that it matters how we show up for ourselves and for each other. So we make a commitment this morning. We say a vow of sorts, but it's not on the level of strong arming life, molding it into what we think we need. It's a vow to be curious, a vow to be attentive, a vow to listen, a vow to stay connected to the word that we receive in the meditation here. Now, this history of the white stone comes from a long tradition, a tradition in scripture when people went through transformations. There was a name change. Sarai, Sarah, Abraham, Abram. They had a name change, and in those name changes, their identity changed because there was growth, there was expansion. They weren't the same person they were before, so they were renamed. And names were always significant. They described the person, the characteristics, the quality, like in native traditions. When a name was given, because a name was an essence, an environment, a consciousness. Names are also given when people enter into new chapters of life, like a marriage. Often a new name is taken or a name is expanded to include others to signify the difference, the shift. There's also a tradition of when people are released from prison, released from jail, receiving a stone to symbolize their freedom, their emancipation. This idea of a white stone comes from a lot of historical practices, including ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where jurors in court cases indicated the verdict that they received by either holding in their palm or dropping into a vessel a stone. And a darker stone or a lighter stone would let you know if you have been cleared. And so when they placed the darker stone into the container or revealed it, it showed a guilty verdict. And when they placed the white stone, it revealed a cleansing of sorts, a purification, a resolution that you're free to go, the slate has been wiped clean. The white stone was held as a sign of this freedom. And if it was taken away and you were caught without your stone, you might go back to prison. Could even mean death. But when you were released, you were given the white stone to signify your freedom. There's also an ancient tradition of a stone being like a credit card. Like you could have a stone that had someone's name on it. And that would mean charge it to that account of that family, of that person. I'm with them. There was another one that would give you entrance into different territories where you travel. So you would show your stone, or two parties would exchange a stone and write their own name on it, and it would show that you had hospitality here. It would show that you're welcome here, that you're recognized here, you're safe here. Kind of like that yard sign I saw, showing that this is safe space for safe passage. A little different from the first experience when we go out on the road and we think, what is happening to the world? Where is kindness? It shows you, no, you're recognized here, you're welcome here. Conscious, safe passage. So speaking of clearing, what could you be cleared of? Are you willing to give yourself the white stone? Are you willing to set aside the others, the stones of judgment of yourself, the stones that bind you to the past, and to take in your hand on this morning the stone or a piece of white paper that symbolizes your freedom, that symbolizes a release from bondage, that calls you to be. This symbolizes your shift. Maybe it's a shift from loss, a shift in your power. Maybe it's about accomplishing something or your own becoming. Maybe it's about moving through grief into the next experience of the now moment. Moving forward, completing something, letting something go, deciding something's not going to come with you into the new year. Maybe it's about receiving a name or an idea around the you that's not holding on to something that you know you're holding on to, that's not hurt by something that you know you've spent too much time being hurt by, that's not afraid of whatever you have been afraid of. But this white stone is a symbol of a new identity, a guarantee of safe passage, a connection to your spirituality, to your source, to the substance needed. Holding that stone is you being judged as innocent, getting a reprieve, hospitality, privilege, honor, security, victory. I saw a video recently that a man recorded where he shared a story that he said he had never shared before, aside from sharing it with his wife and a couple of close family members. And he said he shared it because during these times, in these last 2 years, he's seen so much fear of death. And so he shared this story because it was a transformation experience for him, a transformation experience like we're talking about with the white stone, that you become something new. And the story that he shared was about having a procedure on an operating table. And it was supposed to be a simple procedure, but something went wrong. And he ended up lying lifeless on the table for 20 minutes, pronounced dead for 20 minutes. And he said during that time, he hovered above his body. He even saw the nurse running out of the room, down the hallway, yelling, I killed him, and trying to get people to come in to help. Seeing doctors and staff frantic, upset, navigating the room. He said that he sensed a presence there with him in the experience. And he said that he was told it was time to come back after kind of being led towards another experience that he knew was so, so, so peaceful and so beautiful. And I tend to think of this guy as not a typical, not a guy that you would typically think, I don't know, would share this story. He reminds me of my Uncle Bob, who was a New York City fireman. He was the captain of a fireboat. And he was a big guy. He was a guy that wouldn't make up stories. Not stories that weren't real. And he told that story in such a beautiful way as a gift to everyone who happened upon it. He said he came back into his body, and to the doctor's shock, he came back into his body. And he said for 3 days after that, he had the deepest peace that he's ever had, ever had on the planet. And he said, really, from that experience forward, he has not had an ounce of fear of death. And he was sharing that story with anyone that had ears to listen, because he said he sees so much fear around death. In his heart of hearts, in the depths of his soul, he was freed from that fear, emancipated. He carries a stone metaphysically that gives him safe passage. Now he has been renamed. And he courageously shared that story because he offered that to each one of us. That safe passage wasn't new to him because he had a near-death experience. He wasn't granted peace in the freedom form outside of a body that day. It was granted to him from the moment he was born. It's granted to each one of us. But we don't always get to experience, we don't always receive it. And what we're receiving today is just as powerful There is a realm that we're not bringing in something new, but we're remembering something that was already given that we have forgotten. In the presence of it, the presence of this remembrance will change how we show up for life, how we show up for ourselves, how we show up for the world, how we interact with what we thought was the human condition or what we thought used to be our fears. That's what calling in spiritual substance is about. It's calling in that which underlies all of the things that we think are important. So I invite you to take a deep breath. This meditation time, this spiritual practice comes from Revelation 2:17, and it comes from this passage. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. And that doesn't mean that no one else can know it, but it means that it is known by you. Known biblically means to sit together, to be yoked, to be in union, to merge with. And it says in that passage that I will give you some of the manna. That's the substance. That's that food that you can't store up in a cabinet, but it's what you need in each moment that you don't even know, that has all of the nutrients that are needed for this being. And that applies on a spiritual level. Can you imagine now writing a goal without a spiritual practice like this? Launching a vision without first receiving the fullness of what is available, receiving the nutrient-rich space. Eric Butterworth, Unity's beloved author and teacher, said our goal is really to achieve the consciousness through which substance will flow forth when and as it is needed. The goal is to achieve the consciousness through which substance will flow forth when and as it is needed. So I invite you to take a deep breath and take your stone in your hand, or just hold that piece of paper, or just hold your heart. Inhale and exhale into this space. We allow ourselves to just lift aside the goals, the resolutions, the ideas, whatever it was said in our minds as the new year passed, and we may have made a declaration and said, I will do that this year, that I haven't done yet, or I will release that, or I will show up like that. And maybe there was a little trepidation in the field when you said it, going, yeah, but I haven't done it before. I've said this before and I haven't done it. Just lift those up and set them aside with an open hand, knowing that right here, right now, this is the practice where we call forth from the blueprint that remembrance, asking for what is ours, getting in tune with the question, who am I called to be? Who am I called to be? In order to move forward and in order to show up knowing that I am an inlet and an outlet, knowing that my source is right here, knowing that substance will flow forth in my life, in and through me, when and as I need it. Who am I called to be? What am I to be cleared of? What will serve as my guiding light? What will I live into this year? You pick the question. If this is about a shift, if it is to symbolize your freedom, if it's about your becoming, if it's about moving forward or completing something or letting go or releasing. And just hold the space now as you hold your stone. Knowing that it is your source's great pleasure to give you the substance. Knowing that what is needed, what is called for, has already been given, but just may have been beyond my sight. So in this moment, we call it forth. As we inhale and exhale, we ask to receive what is ours to receive in the silence, what is ours to receive that was already been given, that was already given to us, but we may have just left it aside and not picked it up, not noticed it. But we're listening now. And we understand that we are known. We are truly known in the great mind of our source. So in this space, in our own way, we each ask, what is the word? What is the name that I am to receive, that you have for me today? In the silence. As you inhale and exhale, you may receive a feeling, a color, a vision, a word, a name. Whatever it is that you receive, you write that on your stone. If anything comes up that feels like, no, but I want it to be this one, or I'm worried if it's that one, simply release that, set it aside, let it go. There is a gift. If you've not received the name yet, just breathe into the feeling that you have. You may not have a word. It may not be your learning style. It may not be your listening style. Just hold that stone or hold that paper. Squeeze it and ask. And know that in this moment, your heart has been heard. Your willingness and your intention is known. And the gift has been given. Substance will flow forth when and as you need it. And so it is. And if you choose, bringing the hands to the heart center, and just breathing into a moment of gratitude. And showing up, remembering that where you are, source is. Where you go, source goes. You cannot be separate from this inlet, outlet experience. So it is.